I always thought our cul-de-sac in suburbia, Ohio, was the definition of the American dream. We had the two-story colonial with the wraparound porch, the manicured lawn that I spent every Saturday morning mowing, and neighbors who waved from across the asphalt whenever they rolled their trash cans down to the curb. My wife, Chloe, and I had built what we thought was an impenetrable life. We met in college at Ohio State, endured the broke years of eating instant ramen in a cramped apartment, and finally made it. I landed a senior project manager role at a logistics firm downtown, which meant a hefty commute but a comfortable six-figure salary. Chloe worked from home doing freelance graphic design, a setup that seemed perfect because it gave her the flexibility she always wanted. We were happy. Or at least, that is the lie I played on a loop in my head every morning during my 45-minute drive into the city. The shift didn't happen with a massive explosion. It started with a guy named Mark. Mark moved into the house directly across the street about 8 months ago. He was a contractor, a guy who worked with his hands, built custom decks, and had that effortless, rugged charm that made him instantly popular at the neighborhood block parties. He was divorced, lived alone, and seemed like a genuinely decent guy. When he first moved in, I went over with a six-pack of local IPA to welcome him to the neighborhood. We talked about sports, home renovations, and the absolute nightmare of dealing with the local homeowners association. He was easy to talk to, and before long, he became a regular fixture in our lives. If I was working on a project in the garage, Mark would wander over, lean against the doorframe, and offer a hand or some solid advice. Chloe liked him too. She said it was nice having someone close by who could help out if something went wrong with the house while I was stuck in meetings downtown. I agreed with her completely. I trusted my wife implicitly, and I trusted the ecosystem of our quiet little street. Because of my new promotion, my schedule became brutal. I had to be out of the house by 6:30 in the morning to beat the worst of the Interstate 71 traffic, and I rarely rolled back into our driveway before 7 in the evening. It was exhausting, but I told myself it was all for our future. Chloe was always supportive, kissing me goodbye at the door while the sky was still a bruised shade of purple, promising she'd have dinner waiting when I got home. But after a few months of this routine, I noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere of our home. It wasn't something I could easily put my finger on. It was just a feeling, a slight chill in a room that used to be warm. Chloe started talking about Mark more often. It was always innocent. Mark helped her fix the garbage disposal. Mark looked at the rattling sound the HVAC unit was making. Mark recommended a new deli down the road. I was grateful at first. I even texted him a few times to thank him for looking out for her. Then the small details started adding up, creating a picture I wasn't ready to look at. I noticed Chloe started dressing differently on weekdays. When you work from home as a freelancer, the standard uniform is usually sweatpants, oversized hoodies, and hair tossed up in a messy bun. But lately, whenever I forgot something and had to call her on FaceTime during lunch, she was wearing nice blouses. Her hair was done. She was wearing the subtle, expensive makeup she usually reserved for our date nights at that upscale steakhouse downtown. When I asked her about it once, laughing and asking if she had a big corporate client meeting over Zoom, she flushed slightly and said she just felt like putting herself together to boost her productivity. It made sense. People do that all the time to stay motivated when working from isolation. I didn't think twice about it. The real turning point came on a Tuesday in early October. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were turning those deep, fiery shades of orange and red that make New England and the Midwest look like a postcard. My company was restructuring its regional accounts, which meant a massive, high-stakes presentation for the executive board. I had spent the last 3 weeks working 80-hour weeks, surviving on black coffee and adrenaline. The meeting was scheduled for 1 in the afternoon. I arrived at the office early, prepped my slides, and stood in front of the mirror in the executive restroom, straightening my tie and telling myself that this was the moment that would secure our financial freedom for the next decade. But life has a twisted sense of humor. At 11:30, just as the board members were starting to arrive from out of town, our regional VP walked into my office with a pale face. The entire project had been put on a sudden, indefinite freeze due to a legal compliance issue at the corporate headquarters in Chicago. The presentation was canceled. The months of work were temporarily useless. The sudden deflation of adrenaline left me feeling hollow and exhausted. My boss looked at me, saw the dark circles under my eyes, and patted my shoulder. He told me to take the rest of the day off, go home, get some sleep, and we would deal with the fallout on Wednesday morning. I walked out to the parking garage in a daze. The clock on my dashboard read 12:15 when I started the engine. Part of me was incredibly frustrated about the delay, but another part of me felt a wave of relief. I was going to get a rare, unexpected afternoon with my wife. I imagined pulling into the driveway, surprising Chloe, ordering some takeout from our favorite Thai place, and just crashing on the couch together to watch a movie. It felt like a stolen piece of paradise in the middle of a chaotic week. The drive home was eerily quiet. The highway, usually choked with bumper-to-bumper traffic, was wide open at that hour. I made incredible time, singing along to the radio, the disappointment of the canceled meeting melting away into the anticipation of surprising Chloe. As I turned into our subdivision, the familiar rows of identical houses and perfect lawns felt welcoming. I slowed down as I entered our cul-de-sac, ready to pull into our garage. That was when I saw it. Mark's massive silver pickup truck wasn't parked in his own driveway across the street. It was parked directly in front of my house, idling smoothly against the curb. I frowned, a sudden knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't uncommon for Mark to be near our property if he was helping Chloe with something, but there was an odd deliberateness to the way the truck was positioned. I pulled my sedan up behind his truck, cutting the engine. The silence inside my car was suddenly deafening. I sat there for a moment, staring at the front of my beautiful home. The blinds in the living room were drawn tight, which was unusual for midday because Chloe loved letting the natural light in while she worked at her desk near the window. I got out of the car, slamming the door a little harder than intended. As I walked up the concrete path to our front porch, the air felt cold. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my house keys. The metal felt heavy and freezing against my palm. I didn't ring the doorbell. Why would I? It was my house. I unlocked the front door quietly, stepping inside the foyer, expecting to hear the sound of Chloe's fingers flying across her keyboard or the murmur of the television. Instead, the house was completely silent, save for the soft, melodic sound of jazz music drifting from the kitchen at the back of the house. And then, cutting through the music, came the sound of laughter. It was Chloe's laugh, but it wasn't the polite, casual laugh she used with neighbors. It was a deep, breathless, intimate sound that I hadn't heard from her in a very long time. My heart didn't shatter right away. It felt more like it turned to solid ice, heavy and jagged in my chest. I stood in the foyer, the keys still gripped tightly in my fist, the metal biting into my skin. The smell of our home hit me, usually a comforting mix of cinnamon candles and clean laundry. But today, underneath that familiar scent, there was something else. The rich, savory aroma of garlic, white wine, and seared meat was floating from the back of the house. Chloe rarely cooked during the day. Usually her lunches consisted of a rushed turkey sandwich or a salad eaten over her keyboard while she answered emails from clients. This smelled like a restaurant. This smelled like an effort. I moved down the hallway, my footsteps entirely swallowed by the plush beige carpet we'd picked out together at a home design center last summer. Each step felt like I was wading through wet cement. The jazz music got louder, a smooth, saxophone-heavy track that I recognized as one of the playlists from our premium audio subscription, the one we curated specifically for hosting dinner parties. The intimacy of the music made the air feel thick, almost suffocating. I reached the threshold where the hallway opened up into our large, open-concept kitchen and dining area. I stopped just behind the drywall partition, hidden from view, my breathing shallow. Through the gap, I could see the kitchen island. It was laid out beautifully. 2 of our best ceramic plates were set out, accompanied by cloth napkins and the crystal wine glasses we usually kept locked away in the china cabinet. A bottle of expensive Pinot Noir sat open in the center, already half empty. On the plates were portions of a gourmet pasta dish, steam still curling lazily into the air. Chloe was sitting on one of the high-backed bar stools. She was wearing an emerald green silk dress I hadn't seen before, her hair falling over her shoulders in soft, perfect waves. She looked breathtaking, and the realization that this version of her wasn't meant for me felt like a physical blow to the stomach. Mark was standing right next to her, leaning against the counter with a glass of wine in his hand. He had his sleeves rolled up, revealing his muscular, sun-tanned forearms, and he was looking down at her with an intense, undisguised possession.
I'm just saying, Chloe murmured, her voice carrying a playful, teasing weight that made my blood run cold. If you keep making this garlic shrimp pasta, I might have to start extending my lunch breaks indefinitely. Mark laughed, that low, rumbling sound that our neighbors always found so charismatic. He reached out, his hand moving with a terrifying familiarity, and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline for a second too long, and Chloe didn't flinch. She leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a brief, damning moment. Hey, your husband goes to the office at 6:30, right? That gives us plenty of time. I told you, I'm a man of many talents, Chloe. Construction is just the day job. You're terrible, she whispered, but she was smiling. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes locking onto his over the rim of the glass. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared secret that lived in the quiet spaces of our house while I was 25 miles away, sweating over spreadsheets and corporate deadlines to pay the mortgage on the roof over their heads. The sheer betrayal of it didn't compute as anger at first. It was a profound, disorienting confusion. This was Mark, the guy who helped me hoist a heavy garage storage rack just last month. The guy who had sat on my porch, drank my beer, and talked about how hard his divorce was. And this was Chloe.
The woman who held my hand when my father passed away. The woman who promised me forever in front of 100 people in a rustic barn venue in Hocking Hills. How long had this been going on? How many times had I driven out of our cul-de-sac in the gray morning light, only for Mark to walk across the street the moment my taillights disappeared around the corner? I felt a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. My vision narrowed until all I could see was the green of her dress and the smug, relaxed posture of the man standing in my kitchen. I wanted to storm in. I wanted to flip the island, shatter the crystal glasses, and tear Mark apart with my bare hands. The urge was primitive, a raw, pulsing anger that screamed at me to claim my space and demand answers. My hand gripped the edge of the drywall so hard the paint crinkled under my fingers. But then, a cold, calculating instinct took over. If I walked in right now, what would happen? They would jump apart. They would look guilty. There would be a flurry of panicked excuses. It's not what it looks like. We were just talking. He was helping me with the kitchen cabinets. It was just an innocent lunch. They hadn't crossed the physical line of a kiss or more right in front of my eyes yet, even though the emotional and physical intimacy was dripping off them. If I confronted them now without undeniable proof, Chloe would gaslight me. She would tell me I was being paranoid, stressed from work, letting my imagination run wild because of the presentation freeze. She was a master of words. She did it for a living with her design pitches. I would look like the crazy husband disrupting a neighborly lunch. No, I needed to be smart. I needed to know exactly how deep this knife went before I pulled it out. I forced myself to take a step backward, then another. I retreated down the carpeted hallway with the stealth of a ghost, my heart hammering against my ribs so loudly I was terrified they would hear it over the jazz music. I reached the front door, turned the knob with agonizing slowness, and stepped back out onto the porch. The crisp October air hit my face, shocking my senses. The world outside looked exactly the same. The sun was shining, a yellow school bus was rumbling down the main road a block away, and Mark's silver pickup truck was still idling quietly at the curb, its exhaust puffing faint white plumes into the autumn breeze. I walked back down the concrete path, got into my sedan, and closed the door softly. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely insert the key into the ignition. I started the car, shifted into reverse, and backed out of the cul-de-sac. I drove 3 blocks away, pulled over into the parking lot of a local neighborhood park, and killed the engine. I gripped the steering wheel and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for years. The tears came then, hot and stinging, blurring the sight of the children playing on the swings across the grass. The humiliation was crushing. I was the provider, the husband doing everything right, and I had been completely blinded by the 2 people I trusted most in the suburb. I sat there in the quiet of my car for an hour, watching the digital clock on my dashboard tick forward.
knowing that every minute that passed was a minute my wife was spending in the arms of the man from across the street. I needed a plan. I needed to see exactly what happened when they thought no one was looking. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological torture, and I was the one pulling the strings on my own execution. I returned home that Tuesday evening around my usual time, 7:15. The silver pickup truck was gone from the curb, parked back across the street in Mark's driveway where it supposedly belonged. When I walked through the front door, the jazz music had been replaced by the low hum of the evening news, and the kitchen had been meticulously scrubbed. The crystal wine glasses were back in the china cabinet. Chloe was at the stove, stirring a pot of standard chili, wearing her typical gray sweatpants and a worn-out Ohio State hoodie. "Hey, babe," she said, turning to give me a warm, completely ordinary smile. She walked over and kissed my cheek. Her breath smelled faintly of peppermint, an obvious attempt to mask the lingering taste of the Pinot Noir.
"How did the big presentation go? You look exhausted." "It was put on hold," I said, my voice sounding flat and hollow even to my own ears. I didn't look her in the eyes. I couldn't. I pretended to loosen my tie, focusing entirely on the fabric. "Legal issues in Chicago. The whole project is frozen for a bit." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," she murmured, wrapping her arms around my waist. The touch made my skin crawl. It felt like sleeping in a bed of needles. "I know how hard you worked on that. But hey, at least the pressure's off for a little while, right?" "Right," I managed to choke out. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the textured ceiling while Chloe slept soundly beside me. Her breathing was rhythmic, peaceful. How could someone who was tearing our life apart piece by piece sleep so soundly? Every instinct inside me screamed to wake her up, to show her the mental images burned into my brain of her in that emerald green dress, leaning into Mark's touch. But I held back. I needed undeniable, concrete evidence that a divorce lawyer could use to dismantle her completely. In Ohio, assets are divided equitably, but I wanted the truth documented so clearly that there would be no room for her to spin a narrative to our families, our friends, or a judge. On Wednesday morning, I pretended to go to work as usual. I kissed her goodbye at 6:30, drove to a local electronics store downtown the moment it opened, and bought a set of 3 cloud-connected, high-definition security cameras disguised as standard USB wall chargers. They were small, inconspicuous, and streamed directly to an app on my phone. That evening, I waited until Chloe went upstairs to take a shower. Operating with a clinical, detached efficiency, I placed one camera in the kitchen, plugged into an outlet directly facing the island where they had eaten their gourmet lunch. I placed the second one in the living room, hidden behind a stack of design magazines on the side table. The third went into our home office. Thursday was the day of reckoning. I drove to work, parked my car in the corporate garage, and sat at my desk. I didn't look at a single spreadsheet. At 11:45, my phone vibrated with a motion alert from the kitchen camera. My hands shook as I tapped the notification, opening the live video feed. The clarity was terrifying. The camera captured Chloe walking into the kitchen. She wasn't wearing her work-from-home clothes. She was wearing a sleek, form-fitting black sundress, her hair styled in loose curls. She was humming to herself as she set out 2 placemats on the island. A minute later, there was a soft knock at the back door, the door that led to our deck, hidden from the view of the main street. Chloe practically ran to open it. Mark stepped inside, wearing a clean button-down shirt instead of his usual dusty work clothes. The moment the door closed, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed her by the waist, lifting her slightly off her feet, and pulled her into a deep, passionate kiss. Chloe wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her fingers in his hair, reciprocating with a desperation that she hadn't shown me in years. I sat in my pristine, air-conditioned corporate office, staring at a 3-by-5-inch screen, watching my marriage die in real time. The audio was crystal clear. "God, I missed you yesterday," Mark muttered against her neck, his hands moving down her back. "When you texted saying he was home early because of some work disaster, I thought I was going to have to sprint across the street to get my truck before he saw it." "I know, it was a close call," Chloe said, her voice breathless as she pulled back, laughing that same intimate laugh that had broken me 2 days prior. "He was so depressed about his project being frozen. I had to play the doting wife all night just to keep him from suspecting anything. It was exhausting." "Well, you don't have to play a role right now," Mark smiled, leaning in to kiss her again. "What's for lunch today, beautiful?" I ordered that expensive Italian takeout from downtown, she said, leaning against his chest. The one we went to for our anniversary last year. I told him I was just ordering a salad, so I used the cash you gave me to pay for it.
He'll never see it on the bank statements. Every word was a physical strike to my chest. They weren't just having an affair. They were actively mocking me. They were using my routine, my hard work, and my absence as the playground for their betrayal. They had turned my sanctuary into a cheap hotel room, carefully calculating the timelines of my commute to ensure their tracks were perfectly covered. They talked about me like I was an obstacle, an inconvenient roommate who paid the bills, while they enjoyed the fruits of my labor. I watched them sit at the island, eating the expensive food, drinking more wine, laughing, and touching each other with an ease that made me physically ill. I didn't close the app. I forced myself to watch every single second of it. I recorded the entire stream, saving the high-definition files directly to a secure cloud drive, and then backed them up on 2 separate flash drives. I watched for an hour and a half until Mark finally kissed her goodbye at 1:30, slipping out the back door to walk back across the cul-de-sac before the neighborhood kids started getting dropped off by the school bus. When the screen finally went static with empty space, the silence in my office was deafening. The sadness was gone now, completely burned away by a cold, incandescent fury. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I closed my laptop, packed my briefcase, and walked out of the building. I wasn't going home to play the oblivious, comforting husband anymore. The game was over, and they had no idea that I held every single card in the deck. I spent the next 2 hours in the office of a high-powered divorce attorney downtown, a woman named Sarah, who specialized in high-asset cases and came with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. I sat across from her mahogany desk, my hands steady as I flipped open my laptop and played the footage from the kitchen camera. Sarah didn't blink. She watched the video with a cold, practiced eye, then looked up at me with a sharp smile that told me everything I needed to know. She told me to go home, act completely normal for one more night, and let her file the paperwork first thing Friday morning. She assured me that with the evidence I had secured, Chloe's leverage in any asset negotiation was effectively zero. Driving back into our subdivision that evening felt like entering a movie set where I was the only actor who knew the script. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, bleeding shadows across the perfect lawns. Mark's truck was parked in his driveway. Lights were on in my house. When I walked inside, Chloe was sitting on the living room sofa, typing away on her laptop. She looked up, offering that same practiced, beautiful smile that had deceived me for months. "Hey, babe," she said, shutting her laptop. "You're a little late tonight. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I replied, taking off my jacket and hanging it in the closet. "Just tying up some loose ends at the office."
Long day. "I made a pot roast," she said, standing up and stretching. "It's been simmering all afternoon. You must be starving." I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the terrifying ease with which she could transition from a passionate affair in the afternoon to a domestic housewife in the evening. "Actually, Chloe, I'm not that hungry. I think I'm just going to head up and get some rest." She frowned slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her face, but she didn't push. "Okay, honey, let me know if you change your mind." I lay awake that night, counting the hours. I didn't sleep a wink. Every time she shifted in her sleep or her arm brushed against mine, my muscles tensed until they ached. I was waiting for the morning. I was waiting for the clock to run out on the massive lie we had been living. Friday morning arrived, gray and overcast. I went through the motions. I got dressed in my best charcoal suit, grabbed my briefcase, and kissed her goodbye at 6:30. She mumbled a sleepy response from under the duvet, completely unaware that it was the last time she would ever see me as her husband. Instead of driving to the office, I drove to a local coffee shop a mile away from our neighborhood. I sat by the window with a large black coffee, my eyes glued to my phone. Sarah had promised the papers would be served at exactly 11:30 in the morning, the exact time Chloe usually started prepping for her secret lunches with Mark. At 11:15, my phone buzzed with the familiar motion alert from the kitchen camera. I tapped the screen. There she was, wearing a beautiful deep red dress this time, setting out the placemats, humming the same tune. A few minutes later, the back door opened, and Mark walked in. He caught her by the waist, spinning her around, laughing. They stood by the kitchen island, pouring the wine, completely engulfed in their own little world.
Then, at exactly 11:30, the heavy thud of the front door knocker echoed through the house, clearly audible over the hidden camera's microphone. On the screen, Chloe and Mark both froze. Their heads snapped toward the hallway. "Are you expecting a package?" Mark whispered, his posture instantly turning rigid. "No," Chloe frowned, setting her wine glass down with a trembling hand. "Maybe it's the mailman. Stay here, I'll check." I watched her walk down the hallway, the camera tracking her back as she opened the front door. A tall, serious-looking man in a plain suit was standing on the porch. He held a thick manila envelope. "Chloe Vance?" the man asked, his voice carrying clearly down the corridor. "Yes," she said, looking confused. "You've been served," he said flatly, handing her the envelope. He turned on his heel and walked back down the path before she could even utter a word. Chloe stood in the foyer for a long, agonizing moment, staring down at the legal documents. I watched her hands begin to shake as she pulled the papers out. I knew exactly what she was reading. The front page was a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery, listing her name and Mark's name explicitly. Stapled right behind it were high-resolution, color screenshots from the hidden camera footage from Thursday afternoon. Images of them kissing, images of them holding each other in our kitchen, printed in perfect, undeniable clarity. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp, a sound of absolute, pure panic. She ran back into the kitchen, her face completely pale, the papers clutching to her chest like a shield. "What is it?" Mark asked, stepping forward, his face twisting with anxiety as he saw the look on her face. "Chloe, what's wrong?" "He knows," she choked out, her voice cracking as tears immediately flooded her eyes. "Oh my God, Mark, he knows everything. Look at this." She threw the papers onto the kitchen island. Mark grabbed them, his eyes scanning the pages, his jaw dropping as he saw the surveillance photos of himself. He looked around the kitchen wildly, his eyes darting to the outlets, suddenly realizing that they were being watched. "Where is the camera?" Mark shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "Chloe, where is it?" Right then, while they were frantically searching the room in a panic, I dialed Chloe's cell phone. The ringtone echoed through the kitchen, a loud, jarring sound that made both of them jump. She looked at her screen, her eyes widening as she saw my name. She answered it on the second ring, her voice trembling violently. "David?" She sobbed into the receiver. "David, please, please let me explain. It's not what it looks like, I swear to you." "Don't bother, Chloe," I said, my voice completely calm, devoid of any anger or emotion. It was the voice of a man who had already moved on. "I'm watching you right now. You're looking right at the camera next to the microwave." Both of their heads snapped toward the USB charger outlet. Mark looked horrified, stepping back away from Chloe as if she were radioactive. "You have until 5 o'clock tonight to pack whatever fits into your car and get out of my house," I said into the phone, each word cold and precise. "Sarah has already filed an emergency injunction. The locks are being changed at 5:15. If you or Mark are anywhere near my property after that, the police will be waiting. Anything you leave behind goes in the trash." "David, please," she wailed, dropping to her knees on the kitchen floor, the emerald green dress from Tuesday and the red dress from today completely losing their magic as she wept into the linoleum. "We can talk about this. We can go to therapy. Please don't do this." "Goodbye, Chloe," I said softly. I hung up the phone. I sat in that quiet coffee shop, took a slow sip of my lukewarm coffee, and looked out at the rain starting to fall against the glass. The pain was still there, deep and heavy, a scar that would take years to fully heal. But as I watched the two of them on my screen, frantically packing her things into trash bags under the cold glare of the hidden lens, I realized something important. They hadn't just stolen my marriage. They had freed me from a lie. The American dream I thought I was living in that cul-de-sac was dead. But for the first time in a very long time, I was finally waking up.